to talk to Aline Ray Brinson. Aline, tell us a little bit something about yourself. When were you born?
I was born on July the 9th, 1910 in Georgetown, South Carolina.
Okay.
My father worked for the Atlantic Coast Line in the logging train, on the logging train. And his family, of course, were farmers. Oh, you want to talk to you. And his brothers, one of his brothers worked for the coastline in Florence, South Carolina. But the older brother, he had two brothers, he migrated to Florida. And he went back and he was telling them all about Florida. And my dad got the fever. So there was 4 of us girls, 4 children.
And what were their names?
Mabel Ray Hartman, and her husband still lives here. She passed away 3 years ago. And I'm the second one, Aline Ray Brinson. Nell Lucille Knight, she died 2 years ago. And Ruth Carlisle is living in Wilmington, North Carolina. Then the 2 boys, my brother, the youngest one, he was 19 and he joined the CCs and went to California.
What was his name?
Herbert Jr. Everybody called him Junior, but Herbert. And he contracted pneumonia the night that they got to San Francisco, and they shipped him back a corpse 6 weeks later. He was 19. That was quite a shock to the family. And the day that we got the word that Herbert had died in California, my oldest brother, Roscoe, got his letter from the government that he had been drafted. But the draft board here was so kind. They, let's see, Herbert died the 2nd day of November. So they waited till January to induct my brother. And he was in the service for 26 years. And during that time, he married and has 4 sons. They live in Orlando. And his wife died. But anyway, then there was 2 younger girls. They joined the Navy when they got out of high school. We all graduated from Titusville High School.
What were their names?
The oldest one was Vendel, V-E-N-D-O-L. And she married, after the war, she married a man from North Carolina. And she died, had cancer. And my youngest sister was born in 1924. She was 2 years old, or 4 years old when we moved from Cocoa to Titusville.
And what was her name?
Ethel Ray. She never married. And but my mother died when she was born. She was 2 hours old when my mother died. So my aunt had come down from South Carolina to help take care of us children. Now just think of that many children to take care of. And she just stayed on and helped. And the year after Mother died, in 25, my dad married my aunt. We always called her Aunt B, Francis, remember. And so anyway, she raised, of course, I was 14 when my mother died. So I thought.
What was your mother's maiden name?
Ethel.
Her maiden name?
Oh, Hutchison.
Hutchinson.
Yeah, she was the, as I said, she was the oldest of those 9 girls.
So when you came to, how old were you when you came to Titusville?
16.
16. Okay. And what did your dad do then?
Well, he left the State Road Department in 24 and went with the city of Cocoa as chief of police. And he was police there till 28. And the commissioners decided they were going to make a change in the operation of the Olde Folks Home. It was getting so dilapidated, and Mr. Day that owned it, was running it, Lee Day's father, he was ill, and his wife wasn't able to. And so anyway, they asked Mr. Copeland, the commissioner from Cocoa, asked my dad if he wouldn't consider taking over the management of the Olde Folks Home.
Now, where was this located here in Titusville?
On Barna Avenue, and you know where Barna is?
Yeah.
Okay, you come off of Park, come on around, make this circle and go on over to Harrison.
So it extended from Harrison.
From Harrison to Park.
To Park, okay. And what was located on this piece of property for the Olde Folks Home, and this was approximately what year?
Well, it was 1928. It's when we moved here.
Okay.
March the 1st. We moved on the last day of February, but Dad's, and they paid him $150 a month salary, plus his living and his family. Now, that was quite a good deal, because you take 8 children. And
well, where was the building look like?
oh, we had, as you come in off a Park, as I said, and the road was a 2-lane sand road, and it was almost a mile. It was a mile. And you got in the right-hand lane and you stayed there. You didn't cross over. If you met anybody, they had to get out. If they was in your lane, they got out because you didn't. I pushed and shoved. But in the fall of 28, the commissioners decided that they could, maybe with my dad's experience in road, and the county engineer, Mr. Smith, they got with him, and Mr. Paxton, you never knew him, did you? He was an engineer too. They all got together, and with my dad's knowledge of road building, they decided they could pave Barna Avenue. It wasn't called Barna then, it was called County Farm and Road, the County Farm Road. They went across the road of Park to a rock pit, a coquina rock pit, which was, I'll put that pencil down, and blasted the coquina rock with dynamite and crushed it with a gasoline crusher. They went 12 inches down. I think they said that the 8 was you had to go 8 inches, but the engineers decided with the sand, they just go 4 more inches. So they crushed that, and they used, the help was the prisoners from the county jail. They've hired 2 men to guard them, and at night they slept in the jail up here next to the courthouse, and then in the morning they would bring them out to the farm for breakfast and dinner and supper before and all the cooking, everything was done at the big house. That was where we lived.
What did the compound consist of? Were there, how many buildings?
Well, that's why there was the main building, and they built a kitchen onto the back of it.
And that's where you lived?
We lived there. There was a bedroom downstairs and a living room. Upstairs, there was 2 bedrooms. And the day we moved in, they started putting plumbing in, putting a bathroom in upstairs. They had outhouses. We had no telephone. We used kerosene lamps. And, it was, let me see, in the late 30s before they ever got a telephone. But they finally, the Florida Power and Light came in down De Leon, and through negotiating, they got a line run from Park Avenue over, and the Florida Power and Light, they put lights, the county had, and they put a telephone on the same pole that the light pole was on.
Now, how many other buildings? There was the big
All right, then we had, then here was the big building you came in. Then over to the left was a 3-bedroom cottage and a bathroom. And for the women, for the white women. And across in front of it was an old building that was about ready for the men.
And how many beds did that have in
It had 4 bedrooms. They added on to it till they had, and they'd put 2 men in each room. Then up the hill, about like a block, we say, because it's hilly out that way. That was the colored quarters. And
What did that consist of?
they had 2 buildings. But
And that operated independently? They did their own cooking there?
yeah, the Negroes did their own cooking, most of it. Or they would come up to the kitchen and get whatever they wanted. But the men, as I'm trying to say, all the food, the diet, and everything went through our kitchen. My mother had the menus and everything. Then they would use the prisoners as yard people to look after the old folks, the men, and the women, why, we all helped. We had very few women. Sometimes we'd have 2 or 3. And, but the men seemed to be more, a lot of them were being like street people that they'd pick up on the street. They had nowhere to go and they were sick, and they'd bring them out there. So,
how did your father operate the Olde Folks Home? I understand he liked it to be called the Olde Folks Home and nothing else.
It was the old folks because they were old folks, and some of them didn't have any relatives or nowhere else to go. And the blacks were the same way.
What did some people refer to it as that your father didn't like?
Oh, he didn't want them to call it the poorhouse. Some people say, oh, you live at the poorhouse. I said, yeah, don't you want to come and live with us? And Dad told us that, and we were old enough, I was being next to the oldest, I was old enough to know that times was hard. And you take 8 children coming up, that's pretty. And we were allowed, gasoline was 20 cents a gallon. And we were allowed $1 worth to come to church. And when we rolled out our gas, my Dad would say, well, the car has to stay in the yard.
Operating of the poorhouse, I understand that your dad helped to start the cemetery. Tell us
Oh,
about
yes.
that.
Well, the county was paying Mr. Coon, who was the mortician, $10 for every body that he buried. I think they just took wherever they could find a lot at Oak Lawn or somewhere, because that was the only place they cemetery besides LaGrange. And so the commissioners, Mr. Brockett, and Mr. Dunn out at Mims, and Mr. Fortenberry over on the island, the 5 commissioners decided that they had all that land out there, and why couldn't they bury their own? So they worked through the legislature or whatever they had to go through with. And they said yes, they could, and they could bury them. At that time, I don't know what the law is now, but at that time, if you buried anybody within 24 hours, you didn't have to have them embalmed.
This was about 1932, as I understand.
The beginning of the early 30s. So they asked my dad. He was a very versatile man. He could do anything, and very kind. And so he asked them what they wanted to do about the coffins. And we had, at that time, if you were a prisoner and you had a sentence of not over 2 years, you served your time at the county farm. And there was an old gentleman there, Frances says she remembered it, and he was serving 2 years for making moonshine.
What was his name?
Deke Jones. And he was a carpenter, handyman. He was in his early 70s or what. And so he and my dad got together, and Dad, he drew out the plan. He went over here to Morgan Lumber Company, which is lumber, and asked them and they said yes, they would cut the boards. And if he needed a coffin, he would go and get the boards, and Mr. Jones would put them together. And then we would, I'd help my dad, because I was the oldest, and helping. Because Dad made it very plain to us that that was our home, and we had to help. We couldn't just play around. And we would take cotton batting and tack around the coffin, and then take white muslin and kind of pleat it around and put a pad in the bottom. And they'd put the body in there, and then we'd put a sheet on them, and they'd put the top on.
And you put a little pillow in there?
Oh yeah, we'd make a little pillow. And now the cemetery you're speaking, it was about like from here to the railroad. If you went round, come down Barna and turn at Day Street and go back. And so they had a tractor and a trailer. And when they'd have a funeral, to pass the time of day, I would take all the children, which my younger brothers and sisters, and we would go to the funeral. We'd gather periwinkles or flowers, and we'd go to the funeral. Color to white, it didn't make any difference. And we'd go to the funeral, and Dad would get the different ministers that would volunteer to come and have the service. And you were speaking, I was telling you about the colored minister, Preacher Harvey. He was born and raised here in Titusville. And he'd come every Sunday afternoon down that road from Colored Town back through, and you'd hear him come singing. And we'd ask my dad if we didn't have a date or if the boyfriends didn't have money to go anywhere, they'd just come out and we'd maybe make some ice cream. We had charity. we asked my dad one day, I said, can we go sit on the wood pile? That separated the colored from the whites down. And yes, you can go, but the first time that I hear a chuckle, that's it. Okay, Daddy, we won't. And then we'd get to singing and clapping with them, you know, and enjoy it. And you know, when segregation came in, it didn't bother me a bit.
That was a different time, and you enjoyed their music. You enjoyed.
Oh yeah, we'd sing along Rock of Ages and all those old songs, you know. And
now he came every Sunday, Pastor Harvey. He also attended the funerals.
Sometimes he would, yes, if the colored, he'd come. He was the one that would come, and I can hear him say, I told you. He'd say, dear brothers and dear sisters, it ain't when you go, nor how you go, but is you ready to go? And everybody'd sit there. And you know, that's made an impression with me, because the older I get, people are taken like that. Some lay and linger, and then others are taken quickly. So it does make you stop and think, don't it?
How about the pastor that used to tend to the white population at the Olde Folks Home? Do you remember some of their names?
Well, the different denominations. The Catholic priest would come, and if there was a Catholic, or if there was a Presbyterian, or if there was some that didn't, some of them would come out and have. And then sometime the Ladies Missionary Union would come out and give a talk. And we, of course, was very active in the Baptist church here. We brought a good congregation when I brought my family in.
When you're, so actually the Olde Folks Home was pretty independent as far as taking care of the people who lived there. What happened to the Olde Folks Home?
That's a question that I have often asked. They finally, as I said, we got some county commissioners here, I won't name any names, they got money hungry. And they sold that land, and they built a new Olde Folks Home. And that was the one that Mr. and Ms. Day, and what is that there now? Country Acres.
Which is on De Leon.
Uh-huh. But they should have years ago built a good nursing home, because that's what they needed. They had the land, but...
Now, as I understand, the cemetery is still in operation today, which sits off of what is now Day Street.
Mm-hmm, Day and De Leon.
That's right.
De Leon runs north and south, and Day Street comes in from Barna on.
Were the colors and the whites segregated at that time, and if so, how were they buried?
The whites were buried over here. There was a road went through there, through the cemetery, and the colors was buried over here.
Tell us about when your father used to make the tombstones.
Oh, you didn't? Well, they asked you, he made him I'll use my pen. He made him a square, and we took a piece of paper, and we tried to keep a record, you know, of when they came to the home. Of course, some of them had no records, John Jones or something. But anyway, Dad he'd pour his cement and let it set, you understand. And Mr. Ford over here at the hardware store, he ordered him numbers and the alphabet, and then Dad would have me print John Jones, and he was born, if we could get and then he died a certain day. And
This was printed in the stencil on the tombstone?
on the
The
tombstone.
wet cement.
And then when it got hard, set, why Dad would take it and take it over to the cemetery and put it. So I want to go. Frances said she'd go with. I want to go and go through. I've been so many times. So many of the people that I helped take care of and knew their names, I want to go and see them, see their grave.
That cemetery is still in operation today.
Do they?
Still burying there today, yes.
Oh, I'm so glad. It's a beautiful place.
Yes, it is beautiful, under the oak trees. And,
Mm-hmm.
the county home is still in operation.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe...
See, they sold all that property to different, it's housing out there now. Oh, and we also had a barn. We had 2 mules. And Dad always kept 2 milk cows. So there'd be plenty of good milk for the tenants, chickens and turkeys and anything. See, Dad was a farmer, so it just fit right in, but then his health was so bad.
Let me ask you a question. You had mentioned that your father worked for the road department.
Yes.
Okay. What did he do here in Brevard County for the road department? How did he build roads? Where did he build them?
We were in above Jacksonville in Nassau County, and they sent him when he would finish a strip of a portion. Then they'd move him. We stayed one place 2 years, and they'd finish up. They made the road beds with hand shovels and mules, or trucks, mostly mules and manual labor. They started at, where the old highway comes in below Cocoa or Rockledge, comes into US 1.
Yes.
Huh? No, Williams Point's north. We were south. King was the captain of the colored camp at where the prison is today. That was where the camp was for the nigger, and they started at 50 and went south. Dad started at Rockledge, and they went, and before he quit the State Road Department, they were just getting ready to go into Allgalley, or North Melbourne, they call it now.
But when you're talking about the camps, what are you talking about?
They were prison camps. I don't know whether you're familiar with them or not, but they just had big camps, and they had barracks, and Dad would have anywhere from 25 to 30 or 35 prisoners. They would be the white camp or the color. They didn't segregate. And they used prison help.
And this was in the 20s?
Oh yeah, Dad went with them right after World War I. He got a job with the State Road Department. And he moved to DeLand. The first camp that he had was just on 17 north of DeLand. And then we were there 2 years. Then they moved him to Callahan, or up in Nassau. He built the road from Callahan to the St. Mary's River. And then they moved him to Cocoa. And
you lived at Bonaventure?
yes, Bonaventure.
Well, were some of the other people that lived at Bonaventure when you were there? Do you remember their names?
We went to school, we rode the school bus from the Griggses, and I don't know who.
Stewarts? Do you remember the Stewarts at all?
Yeah, they lived there on the river.
Yes.
You come down on the river.
And you said that he helped build the road up to Williams Point?
No, that was the man that had charge of that camp. His name was King.
Oh, King.
He had Negroes.
I see.
He had
So
a black,
they met.
in other words, he had a black camp.
Okay.
See, my dad had all whites.
Did he build any roads in this area, in the Titusville area?
My father?
Yes.
Well, they built Barn Avenue, and another thing, they also cleared Dunn Airport with the county prisoners. See?
Do you ever remember out by Dunn Airport where the old spring was? The spring head that was over near Williams Road and Old Dixie Highway? There used to be a spring head out there. Do you remember anything about that at all?
No. I don't know.
No. Okay. During the early days of Titusville, when you were here, what are some of the things you used to do as a young girl for entertainment?
Well, we had to work at home, and we didn't have too much.
You went to Titusville High School?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I finished my last 2 years there.
And who were some of your schoolmates?
Well, anybody in this 80s, and you think back, she was talking about the Taylors, Lois Taylor. She's married to Guy Boyd. They live out on Manor. I don't know where you know him. He had the Gulf service station here in Titusville for many years. Well, ever since he finished high school. And then there was 30 that graduated in my class. My sister that died 2 years ago, she and I were in the same grade from the 4th grade up. And she...
Did you ride the school bus or did you walk to school?
Well, when we lived at Rockledge, we rode the school bus. And talk about mosquitoes. We had to walk a mile from where our house was, over by the prison camp, over to the river, to the road. So we took rock and built us a big circle so we could build a smudge fire to smudge the mosquitoes away till the school bus come. And the school bus had just seats on each side, and they rolled the canvases down if it rained. If they rolled the canvases down, then the boys would get to slapping the girls. So Mr. Griggs, he was a senior at Cocoa High, and so he wouldn't roll the window down, so when it rained, most of the time we got wet. But we had a lot of fun.
Did you attend this First Baptist Church at Titusville also, in the old church?
Oh, I was married in that church.
You were married in
that
church? Oh,
yeah, in May the 20th, 1939.
And what did Mr. Brinson do?
Well, he worked in Miami with National Biscuit. Had been with them 5 years. And he contracted or developed or whatever. Now that was in 39. And we were married in May, and in October, he began to have back trouble. And he went from one doctor to another. Finally, he went to a specialist. And he said, Mr. Brinson, you got rheumatoid arthritis. There's nothing we found we can do. You just do the best you can. So he got worse, and it began to draw him over. And he was there 3 years. And so then one day, he come home, talking about riding the train. I rode the train from Miami here when my oldest daughter was a baby. And I'd come up that weekend to spend a week with my folks. My husband called, he said, well, you should get on that train Sunday and come home. I don't have a job. They had let him go. They were so afraid that he was gonna say that he got hurt on the job.
How long did it take you to get from Miami to Titusville on the train? How many
Oh,
hours?
not too long.
Do you remember how many hours it took?
Well, you'd leave after lunch and you'd get here before dark. Because you stopped at you stopped all along the road like the bus. So.
Do you remember Dr. Peppers that used to be here? Do you remember a Dr. Peppers?
Yes, and I knew his wife. He died about the time I moved here. But I didn't know him as well as I did his wife, Jessie. Her name was Jessie Peppers. She lived on the same avenue.
Do you remember Dr. Spell?
Oh, yes.
Oh, was he a good doctor?
Well, he ran the drugstore. I never did know much about his doctoring.
No, he ran the drugstore.
His daughter was a very good friend of ours. She was a member of this church here. They were from Kentucky.
You had quite a few people here in the area from Kentucky.
Oh, at one time, why you thought they should have named it Kentuckyville or something.
Who are some of the old timers that you can remember in the area? Do you remember when Bert Johnson had the saloon?
Yes.
What did the saloon look like? Did you ever remember what that was like?
I never went in it, so I don't know.
You weren't allowed in it, as I understand. It was a man's.
Yeah, and he worked at Nevin's Packing House.
Yeah,
and I worked 10 years, packed fruit for Nevin's for 10 years.
Oh, you did?
We worked we'd start in October and wind up in May or June.
What was packing like? What did you pack?
Hard work.
What did you pack the oranges in?
Wooden crates, wooden boxes.
Did you wrap each one?
Every one.
And what were they wrapped in?
Tissue box, and the different size oranges had different size. And you'd pick up the paper with this hand or whatever hand, and you'd pick the orange up, and you'd throw it and then squeeze it and put it in.
Very careful.
And if you made $25 a week, you had made a big one.
At Nevins has been
Wasn't no employment here. And my dad was of the opinion that women stayed at home. They didn't go up and down the road. We wanted to go, my sisters and I wanted to do like some of the other girls, get on, they call them fruit tramps. I don't know what you call them. Dad said, no, as long as you're under my roof, you're not going to be going up and down the road.
Do you remember some of the other packing houses in the area in the old days?
Well, we had the Blue Goose,
Yeah. Where was that
American
located?
Fruit Growers. It was on 46 right across the railroad. They've tore it down. The Baptist Church, I think, has that now.
Right, that was still right.
And then the Citrus Exchange was right across the 46. And then out off of Wiley, do you know where Wiley is?
Yes, in Mims,
What was that?
JJ.
No, JJ was down here on JJ Road. I know, I went there 10 years. Twilliger. He had a.
At the end of Wiley.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand the railroad used to come up by there and they used to load them on the trains.
Oh yeah, the railroad go there, and we go to work, and Mr. Brown would say, "Well, y'all get to work now. I've got so many cars that's got to go to England or somewhere," and we had to get them through so they train could pick them up when it come by.
What was the worst hurricane you ever saw here? Do you remember the hurricane?
We ain't had no hurricanes through here.
Well, how about a high wind blowing then?
Well, in 45,
What happened to the wharf out here?
yeah, that was in 45.
Okay,
It tore all
tell us
the.
what happened?
Well, the wind came. We got up the next morning, and there was the the fish houses was all floating around in the.
Out at the end of Broad Street.
Yeah. Now I'll tell you something. You can mark it. We've never, go back in your history. Don't take my word for it. Had a hurricane that's come in from the Cape into this area. They've either come in at Melbourne or below or New Smyrna. And when I was a girl, there was a hurricane out there in the Atlantic, a churning and churning. And we had some friends that lived over, Everwines. Did you remember? They were commercial fishermen. And they were boys, you know, and they'd come. I had a sister that lived here. And he said, we wanted to go out over to the beach, but they wouldn't go. And we wouldn't dare let our folks know. But he said, that hurricane's not coming in here. He said, you can get your history book, and you've never had a hurricane. And I would tell people that, and they'd laugh. Well, but that's the truth.
How cold, what's the coldest day you ever remembered here in Titusville? How cold did it get?
Oh, 24, 25.
Do you remember what happened to the orange groves back then?
Yes. In 28, we were living in Cocoa. And my father, they were having some South Carolina get together at Lake the Notasassa. Do you know where that is? It's over near Orlando somewhere. And his sister was coming in from Clearwater. And, well, Dad decided he'd go and he'd take us older girls with him. I like to froze to death. I saw fish that big froze in the Tampa Bay. That's the coldest I've ever seen it. But I've seen it way, down. Mm-hmm.
Temperatures used to be not as hot then in the early days as they are now, mm-hmm. and colder in the wintertime. But I believe the average temperature, it never got above like 87, 89 degrees. Is really hot for this area. Getting back to the early days, did you use mosquito beaters?
Oh yeah, you mean them beaters?
How are they made?
Well, they cut the bud out of the palmetto and strip it, and then hang it up to dry. And when it gets dry, then they strip it some more and take twine and make a handle. You hang it by the door. And before you went in the house, you dusted yourself off good with the mosquito beater.
So you wouldn't take them inside, right?
No. Yeah. And we used to put our hand up on the screen so that you
put the hand up on the screen and they would make.
They don't know what mosquitoes are anymore. Mm-hmm. I know what mosquitoes have been.
What was 4th of July here in Titusville?
Oh, we always had a free, now listen, we had a free fish fry. The mullet, the fishermen, you know, this used to be the mullet of the world or something.
The mullet capital of the world.
And the fishermen would donate the fish and clean them and everything. And the men would fry them, and they have it out at Sand Point. The merchants would furnish the grease, the lard or whatever, and the rolls and whatever. And we'd have a free fish fry. And they made this vat. We had a man here, Mr. Higgs, I don't want to handle that, was a tinner, you know. He worked with the tin, and he made them these vats, and they'd put the fish, made baskets, and they'd lay the fish in there and put them in that hot oil and let them get brown and dump them out. They were so good. Oh, I wish I had one now.
Do you ever remember eating swamp cabbage?
I wish I had some.
How did you make swamp cabbage? Do you remember?
Well, my mother used to just, and I do too when I can get them, cook them like I do cabbage. You have to peel them. You cut the bud out of the young palm. And then you peel that off until you get down to the bud. And that's tender and it's not bitter. But if you don't get that bud off, it's bitter. And then we would take them and cut them up, cook them with a little bacon and.
Good eating, huh? Well, is there anything else you can think that you?
No, I don't think I have. Let me see.
Oh, who were the nurses in the area? Who were the? We had mentioned that there were a couple ladies who were the local nurses in the area because we didn't really have too much doctoring going on. Do you remember old Doc Wilson?
No, he was before my time.
Who were the nurses?
He was Miss Battle's father, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah,
No, we didn't.
okay.
We had the county had a health program, and there were several women that were nurses or went around to the health, took care of people that couldn't take care of themselves.
Well, we're going to end up for now, and I'd like to thank you for coming today.
Let me see.
And I think we have about to conclude it.
Well, I know I've talked a lot and said little.
Thank you, Ms. Brinson.
I gave a talk at the museum, they asked me one time. And my daughter was visiting here from North Carolina. She's the second daughter. A nurse, 30 years. And I was getting my thing ready, and she said, and I read it to her, and I said, Juanita, I said, they want me to give a talk on the 60 years that I had lived in Titusville. She said, Mother, they didn't say they wanted you to talk for 60 years now. So that,
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
tore our building. Did you ever see that beautiful building that Titusville had?
Building, no, but I've seen pictures of it.
It was a Spanish, well, it was Spanish time. Now, why did they tear that down? I cried, I cried, I cried.